Okay, I'd like to get started so we can have as much of the hour as possible. Again, as always, please put your name, your location in the chat, as well as how you heard about today's webinar or your connection to University of Haifa, and put any questions that you have for Professor Salomon or for me in the Q&A section on Zoom and in the Facebook Live section on Facebook. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest in our biweekly series of webinars with American Society of the University of Haifa. I'm the CEO of ASUH, and we're very appreciative that you've joined us today for our program, really from around the world. This webinar is co-sponsored by Rabbi Arthur Weiner and the JCC of Paramus and Congregation Beth Tikva in New Jersey, and we are very grateful for your partnership and your support of today's webinar. As on October 6th, thousands of young adults drove down to Israel's southern border to enjoy music and dance the night away at the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel. In the early morning, as you all know, the celebration turned into a nightmare when Hamas terrorists infiltrated the border from Gaza and murdered, raped, injured, and kidnapped hundreds of the festival goers, making the experience even more harrowing for the victims. Many of them were under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Today's guest speaker is Professor Roy Salomon, a cognitive neuroscientist at University of Haifa who specializes in brain mechanisms of self-consciousness. He's also the co-founder and a board member of SafeHeart, which is an inspiring nonprofit initiative providing psychological aid to survivors of the Nova Music Festival attack. At the University of Haifa, Professor Salomon is a full professor and the primary investigator at the S Lab. Professor Salomon will discuss how SafeHeart has provided much needed support for the survivors of the Nova attack, including sessions with therapists who have experienced working with extreme traumatic events. These clinicians understand rave culture and how to support psychedelic users. He will also explain his ongoing research with the Nova survivors aimed at reducing the chances of them experiencing PTSD, examine why Israel is on the brink of a mental health crisis right now, and he will explore what we can do about it. Thanks to your support, ASUH has been able to raise a lot of funds that are much needed for the survivors of this attack through SafeHeart. We've been providing emergency mental health support for the survivors through a network of psychologists, psychiatrists, clinical social workers, psychotherapists, and licensed clinical supervisors. These funds have also supported the research aimed at improving the therapy and assistance that's being provided to people under the influence of psychedelic substances, and is helping the team to develop tailor-made treatment plans for the survivors. We encourage you to continue supporting Professor Salomon's important research at the university, and we'll put a link in the chat and on Facebook for you to do so. We also want to take this opportunity to thank every one of you who has supported our scholarship fund for reserve soldiers during this very challenging time for Israel. Over the past 3 months or 3.5 months, we've had 1,150 students and 50 faculty members serving in the reserves, including 300 students in the security forces. We've been able to provide emergency tuition and living stipend scholarships of $500 or more to every one of these student soldiers who really desperately need the help. These scholarships provide financial assistance that they and their families need as they attempt to return to some degree of normal life on personal and academic levels when they return from the war after serving and defending the country for several months. With your help, we can continue to increase this fund and ensure the well-being of our brave student soldiers. To contribute to this timely and meaningful fund, you can visit asuh.org/donate. We'll put that in the chat as well. As many of you know, University of Haifa returned to class on December 31st, so they've been back for 3.5 weeks or so, and they're doing that across the country as well. But University of Haifa, as Israel's most diverse campus, is currently and will continue to play a crucial role in ensuring that all sectors of the country's population are able to come together and rebuild the diverse civic society in the aftermath of October 7th. Together with all of you, we will ensure that the University of Haifa continues our efforts to heal Israeli society from its darkest hour. Without further ado, I'm delighted to begin this very special program with Professor Salomon. Thank you so much for joining us and for your time and your busy schedule. As always, we will have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the hour. So please, again, put your questions in the Q&A section, and you can put any comments in the chat section. So let's begin. Thank you again, Professor Salomon, for joining us.
Thank you, Naomi, for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit more about the victims of the Nova attack that you've been working with? What are you seeing that they're struggling with the most since the horrific day, and how has SafeHeart been able to support them?
Yeah. So I think it's difficult, even after all the exposure I've had, to really imagine what these people have been through. And I think, there's been a lot of trauma going around in Israel now. But I think what's been special about the context of the Nova Party and the other two parties that were there is that these were young people, and they were really kind of at a peak experience, really enjoying life. And from there, without any warning, this situation deteriorated into really, a tragic and harrowing experience of being slaughtered by the Hamas terrorists. And on top of that, many, and we know that now empirically that around near 70% of them were using some kind of substance, many of them using psychedelic substances, which are kind of enhance perception and enhance the experience. So for many of them, this was an experience that was not only traumatic, but also experienced under a very strongly altered state of consciousness. And that is something, the stories are really crazy. And that's something that sticks with them, because not all of them were able to function the way they wanted to. And even those that were experiences in a very different way than they would kind of under their normal state of mind.
Of course. Some of the victims, as you mentioned, were under the influence of not only alcohol, but psychedelic substances when Hamas terrorists attacked. A lot of them hadn't even slept all night. They were up all night partying. What do we know about the relationship between trauma and the use of these substances? And how do you seek to provide tailor-made treatment for those who have undergone complex psychedelic experiences and trauma stemming from the attack?
Yeah. So if I can maybe show you some actual data. I think it's nice. So
Sure.
I'd like to share my screen. Great. Can you see my screen? Fantastic. So I'm very happy, and I also want to say that this work, the work of SafeHeart, has been partially supported by donations from people from the ASUH, and we're very grateful for that, because I think the intervention we gave is a very important one. So when the people came back from the party, for me, this story started on the 7th, when I understood the impact of the party, of having a party of nearly 4,000 people, which is attacked by terrorists. And this dawned upon me when I got a WhatsApp message asking if someone could come down to the hospital in Beersheba, because people were arriving in the hospital from the party and they were under the influence of psychedelics, and no one knew how to deal with that. And this was a moment that kind of dawned upon me, and I said, well, we don't have to only take care of these two people, we have to take care of thousands of people who will be coming from this party. And we immediately snapped into action. And I had previously studied MDMA treatment for PTSD. So today, MDMA, it's called Molly or ecstasy, is found to be very, very helpful in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's actually going to probably get FDA approval this year as a breakthrough treatment. And this is something I've studied in the past. So I actually knew quite a few people who kind of knew the intersection of psychedelics and trauma. So knew how to treat trauma and psychedelics together. So I kind of called the people I knew, and it was an amazing response. Within the first day, we already had 50 clinicians who volunteered to give immediate treatment to the people from the party. And we know that one of the most important things to not go from acute stress disorder, which is what we all experience after such a traumatic event, to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that can stick with you and ruin your life forever, is to get there quickly and enable psychological treatment, psychological therapy at a very early stage. So we immediately started connecting. From the 8th, we put up a website. It was a terrible website. I designed it. It was super ugly, but it was effective because people really wanted help. So we reached out to the people, and these people are from my community. I go to these parties. I do harm reduction in these parties, and they trusted us. So on the first day, and on the 8th, we already had 350 people sign up to ask for help. And since then, we've had over 3,000 of the survivors come to us and request help, and we've actually helped 2,500 survivors and their families. So initially, this was an immediate intervention of 3 to 5 sessions where we brought a clinician. And people were not doing well. We actually we really had to sometimes kind of really stretch the way clinicians do their work. Typically, therapists, they sit at their clinic and people come to them. And here we had people who would not leave the room. So I had, I was speaking to parents. They said, he hasn't left his room in 5 days. What do I do? And I said, listen, you're going to slide the phone under the door and we're going to try to talk to him. So this is something that really required, it was a very strange and unique situation. It also required a very unique response. So now we have over 500 clinicians working with us, and we're treating hundreds of people for long-term treatment. So we've gone from an immediate intervention with these people, which is super important. And now we're working with over 700 of them for a long-term therapy, and our goal is to give them therapy for at least 1 year. And this is a big thing to do. It's become a monster of an NGO. We didn't exist a few months ago, and now we're one of the largest mental health centers in Israel. And now, about 1 month into this, we understood that this has never happened before. We have no idea how experiencing trauma under the influence of psychedelics may impact the clinical trajectory. So are these people going to end up better or worse? Does this depend on which substance they used at the party? So about a month after being a cognitive scientist, I started asking these questions and forming the research branch of SafeHeart, which is under the University of Haifa and in my lab. And on my lab, we stopped doing all the other stuff we do, and we started doing this. And we had 3 main questions. The first question is, how can we help? How can we now derive scientific knowledge which will allow us to better treat these people that came back from the party? And the second, and maybe more interesting scientific question is, how does having this trauma under psychedelics impact what's going to happen with the trauma, how people process this? And finally, there's also a general question, what are the components allowing some people to have resilience? So people go through trauma, and most of them are okay. And then some are not okay. And for us, it's very, very important to, at an early stage, to understand who are the people who have resilience and not bother them too much, and try to focus our efforts on people that need more help. Okay? So we are doing something scientifically which is very special. We're not doing this in a very kind of typical academic scientific way. We've thrown everything to the wind, and we're just doing this, the whole lab, my lab and the lab of a friend of mine, Salomon, also from Haifa. And what we're doing is basically we're collecting a huge research program, looking both at a large cohort of people who went to the party. We now have over 850 people collected in a month and a half, where we do questionnaires and we do cognitive testing with them. And then we also have a depth cohort, for which we do a lot of work to understand the mechanisms by which actually people either recover or go into PTSD. So just to understand how we do this, we have a huge cohort of over 100. We're aiming for 300. We have now over 120 people. And we do a huge battery of questionnaires, trying to understand what kind of person, what they went through, how they're sleeping, what kind of social support they have, do they have any adverse childhood experiences? Because we know these are all things that can contribute to PTSD. We give them sports watches for a month. And I think this is a very novel measure and something, because usually, if you bring people into the lab, they can kind of fake it for a second. When you're doing an exam, you try to hold yourself together. But we give them this sports watch for over a month, and then we can see how they're sleeping, how much they're moving, how their heart is working. And then, when you're at home for a month, you just are who you are and you can't fake anything. And we also take saliva samples from them, which allows us to measure different chemicals like cortisol that give us an indication of what's going on stress-wise. Now, I think the important thing here is I'm in this for the long run. So we are now collecting this first batch during what we call the peri-traumatic episode, which is very important, because what happens now will probably drive what goes on later. But we're going to revisit them after 1 year and 1 month. So we never do this on the anniversary because it's very stressful, but we do this after 1 year and 1 month, and do all these tests again. And then again, 3 years after. So this is a longitudinal study that will really allow us to understand how what happened now is related to the mental health outcomes of PTSD, depression, anxiety that we know that arise after such terrible trauma. So we can already see from these watches, just to show you kind of an example. So this is a control person from a healthy group. This was a person who went to a party, but not in Gaza, who was in a party in the north of Israel the same day. And you can see that throughout this month, he kind of sleeps the same amount on every day. And this is someone who went to the Nova party. And you can see that every day has a completely different sleep measure. So we know that by the variance of how well people are sleeping, we can actually predict how well they're doing. And I think this is very important because trauma is something which is going to stick around even beyond this. And how to know whom we need to treat is a very important thing. We also do MRI with them. So we do some resting state. This is what the MRI looks. This is the actual person that we ran yesterday in the MRI. And this is the new MRI in Rambam Hospital, which belongs to the University of Haifa. And we do some resting state. And then what we do is we want to induce a little bit of stress with them. So we show them a movie, which is a movie from trans parties, but not from Israel, which allows us to kind of push them a little bit to feel a little bit of what they felt at the party, because we want to induce some mild stress, see how this changes what's going on in their brain. And then we kind of check up with them again with another resting state session afterwards, and we look at the differences. And then we also have a reinforcement learning task, which looks how people kind of make decisions. Because one of the things we know about PTSD is that, you know, when we experience something traumatic, we try to avoid it. But after a while, if we're healthy, we learn that that it's safe to go back driving after an accident, or if you've had a bad food experience, you can go back to that restaurant after a while. But people with PTSD don't learn to kind of dishabituate from this fear. So this is kind of the research program. It takes a lot of times, it's very demanding, but I think it's very important and exciting. And one of the beautiful things is the people from the party, they're very, very engaged. They really are happy that someone is studying. They sit down, I always get a conversation, and when they start with the study, I say, we're so happy that someone is studying this because it's crazy what we went through. So by studying this and doing this properly over time, we're also validating their experience, and they're really, really happy to be able to also contribute to science and maybe help themselves and other people in this situation. So just to show you a little bit of data to kind of a teaser of what we're seeing, so you can see around 70% of the people report having used different substances. This is a huge amount of people. You can see we have over 460 people here. And only 25% kind of don't report not using any substance. There's a whole mixture of substances that they've used, but I think the ones that were used the most are hallucinogenics. It's mainly LSD, and MDMA, which is an empathogen. It's not really a psychedelic, but it causes these pro-social feelings and feelings of euphoria. And there are also a lot of people who just kind of smoked some weed or drank alcohol, a lot of stimulants as well. But there's this whole mixture, which it makes the question much more difficult to tease apart. And I think the important part of this research, and I actually, this time, yesterday, I gave a webinar to our clinicians where we're trying to kind of close the loop. Because by looking at all these different variables that we collect together, we can start to understand what are the important influences on the PTSD and on the clinical measures. So this is kind of a complex thing to see, but you can see that, for instance, feelings of guilt are something that really drive their clinical situation. So people who are feeling guilt have this strong sense that something is wrong with them, and survivor guilt is a very, very big thing for people that survive such trauma. So by looking at these complex relationships, we're actually able to feed back to the clinicians in real time. Usually academic and scientific work takes years, but now we're doing this in real time, feeding back what we understand for them to be able to treat these people better in the clinic. So just to show that this is a questionnaire which measures post-traumatic symptoms. And you can see our average, each dot here is a person of around 750 people. So our average here is 40. And just to say that the cutoff for PTSD is 37. So despite all this work, we have a lot more work to do because people are still experiencing a lot of trauma and a lot of symptoms related to trauma. And we're still hard at work here because there's still much to do before we can actually say that these people have properly healed. So just to say, we've been supported by many people, and this is very important, but so far all the money has actually gone to treatment because we put that first. And not so much as money we have, right now we're paying for this research out of pocket. So I'm hoping maybe you people will be able to help with that. But before kind of I finish this question, there's something which is really important for me to say and kind of leave you with there. I'm also seeing a lot of resilience and a lot of strength in these people. They come and they're full of humor. They make me laugh, and they go to parties, and many of them have also, this trauma has actually made them grow. So we know there's a lot of post-traumatic growth as well. So just to say that there's also a lot of hope. And I always say I love this. It's the first stanza from Emily Dickinson, that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. And it sings the tune without the words, and it never stops at all. So this is what SafeHeart is about. And yeah, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to tell you a little bit about it and to share what we've been doing and been doing with your help. And may also invite you to kind of join our effort and donate to allow us to do more of this research. So this is kind of a primer of what we've been doing both scientifically and clinically. And yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting to see. I wear one of these Aura rings, which is sort of similar to the watch you mentioned to monitor things as well. And I know that's a really innovative way to see what's going on with people every day. That's a smart idea. And I know, I don't know if you've been hearing, but a lot of what I'm seeing on social media is the phrase, "we will dance again," which is sort of a tribute to the survivors of this attack who maybe would be hesitant to go to another party if those parties are even happening right now in Israel or anywhere in the world, who maybe, I don't know if they're even thinking that they could
So
go to a
I'd love
festival.
to tell you a story. Yesterday, I got a call from a guy named Yoni. He said, "Hey, listen, I got your number. I'm a survivor from the Nova Festival, and together with one of my friends, I'm organizing a party for the survivors." And he's a young guy, but he has a real feel for mental health. So actually, he's starting the party at 6 a.m. when the Nova party was actually stopped. And the first DJ is the last DJ at the party, survived.
Wow. Wow.
And he's really inviting people to come back and try to heal themselves. And this is why he called us and said, "Listen, I think it'd be a good idea if maybe we had some psychologists moving around the party and seeing if anyone needs help." So SafeHeart, as an organization, we took this party, and we're going to have 20 psychologists working there and trying to kind of give the safe haven to people if they need some help going through this. But yeah, I think this is kind of also part of the beautiful resilience and solidarity and strength that these people are showing.
And I understand too that at the site of the festival, there's a big sort of memorial right now with a lot of the pictures and items of the victims of the attack still there. So I assume that'll be there for quite some time to remember them. Thank you. Another question for you is, according to the Health Ministry's medical workforce report that was issued a year ago, the number of psychiatrists per capita in Israel has decreased by 19% over the past decade. I think we all think of Israel as a place with many, many psychiatrists and therapists, but it's been decreasing just like the number of doctors has been decreasing. One response to this challenge is University of Haifa's new School of Medicine, which we're very excited about, and which will address Israel's pressing national needs in medicine, such as the shortage of physicians. And this first of its kind university teaching hospital will feature 1,200 beds, state-of-the-art medical services, a focus on patient-centered care, outstanding ICUs, and cardiovascular, thoracic, and surgical oncology departments. So this is something that we'll be building at University of Haifa in the coming months and years and raising support for. But going back to the challenge itself, why does Israel have this shortage of mental health professionals? I've heard a variety of reasons, but I'm curious from you, your opinion on this, and what can we do to reverse this trend and make sure that we have enough psychiatrists for the current crisis and, God forbid, any future crises of mental health in Israel?
Mm-hmm. So I think the mental health in general has not been a priority for the administration in the last many years. So both at the level of psychologists and the level of psychiatrists, there are less and less. It's very difficult. If you want to find a psychiatrist or a psychologist to get treated now, it's very difficult. And most of this would be private, so it'd be very expensive. So if you're not a rich person, it'd be very difficult for you to get through the public service to get to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And you can imagine the need right now, how many people need to get this. So at SafeHeart, we've actually have a full-time psychiatrist who works with us just to take care of these people and to make it accessible. Because by the time you get to see a psychiatrist, a long time may have passed. And I think this is because the government has not been investing money in this. It's very important. Like, mental health. Mental health is often about the kind of the weakest people in our society. And sometimes they don't vote. And it's kind of easy to neglect them and forget them because they're not, near the centers of power. But I think that this is, we're always measured by how we treat the weakest people in our society, and how we take care of them. And I think now it's very clear how much we need to invest back into mental health and make sure that we have proper support for both psychologists, therapists, and psychiatrists.
I also have heard of friends of mine who are doctors who are going to volunteer in Israel right now. There's an organization that's recruiting doctors and psychiatrists and therapists from around the world to do that, to be there on the ground, to help people. So I think that's a really smart and important initiative as well. Along similar lines, Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, recently reported that dozens of psychiatrists working in Israel's public mental health system have actually left Israel recently for the United Kingdom, with the exodus coming at a time when the demand for mental health services in Israel has been growing due to the Gaza war. What do you know about this phenomenon and its reason? Why UK specifically? Are they going to other countries as well? And what are the implications of Israel having a dearth of mental health professionals at this time? Of course, it's possible that after the war ends, some of the people who left will come back to Israel when it's a little bit safer. But I'm just curious if there's a sort of brain drain happening and why that is.
Yeah, so I think across the board, we're seeing some brain drain. I think we've seen this now with trying to hire people to positions in Israel, in academia. I can understand, given the current situation, and also, now the government has cut the funding for higher education even more. So even at this time, the government has actually cut funding for higher education, cut funding for health in general and mental health. So I can understand people who can go elsewhere, work much less, and make much more money. I'm very non-judgmental about this. I think that many of the clinicians in Israel actually are excellent clinicians, excellent doctors, because they're overworked. So they have a lot of experience. They have sometimes much more experience than their counterparts in other countries. And I know they're also very, very dedicated, I think, but if you don't invest the money and keep people here and make sure that they have good working hours and that they can pay their bills, then it'd be no surprise that people choose to look at other places which are both safer and actually pay better. I find this very saddening. I'm not judgmental about this. Each person has to do what's right for them. But I'm really hoping that, the people I work with and, the people who actually help treat the people here will stay here. And there's also a huge amount of solidarity. I also see the other way around, people coming from abroad, both Israelis and people who are not Israelis, and joining here to help. So it's a big issue, but it has to be solved from the top by giving proper funding.
Is there an initiative right now to do that, or is there a bill in the Knesset to make that happen, to keep people or to recruit people from elsewhere?
So actually, it's kind of to the contrary. They're actually cutting funding to higher education and cutting funding to the health budget. So there's going to be less money, not more money.
Are there any politicians or NGOs that are working to combat that you know of?
Of course. So I think there's a lot of, philanthropic money, which is helping different causes like SafeHeart. So we're funding a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists by having philanthropic money and being able to pay them to do this work. Are the people from the party would never be able to get to a psychiatrist if we didn't have one on call. And I just saw this today, he has over 100 patients that he's treating right now are psychiatrists. So he's overworked, and now we're saying, okay, we'll pay him another day. And yeah, but at the end of the day, really, this is something that has to come from the top and be solved at the level of the country. I mean, it's great to have kind people from all over the world helping us. But I think, first of all, Israel has to do the right thing for itself.
One question that just came to mind too is how useful is it right now in the age of Zoom and telehealth for the option for psychiatrists really from around the world to be offering those services? You don't have to be physically in Israel. Obviously, in-person therapy may be better than virtual, but as a second best option, is it okay for Israeli or other therapists from around the world to be doing, what needs to be done for these survivors and other people in Israel who need mental health support.
Yeah, so we've been doing some of that within Israel, especially at the beginning. Many people did not want to leave their homes. Many of the Nova survivors didn't want to leave the room. So we did it through Zoom. Of course, we prefer in-person therapy. We find it more effective. And it's also good for them kind of get to that point where they can leave the house and go at least for therapy. Sometimes it's difficult to have therapists from around the world. Some of the reasons are language, of course. But there are also other reasons like insurance and the kind of more mundane stuff, but which is also important. So that's not been as effective as we wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
We have some people in Israel treating people from the party who actually left to go back home abroad. So we have it in the other direction.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Just curious overall, if you can talk about it. I know that we've talked a lot about the challenges so far, but what has Israel gotten right when it comes to treating the victims of October 7th, from the Nova Festival and in general, from a mental health perspective, and what can be improved about the country's response? Have they learned any lessons for, again, God forbid, future attacks or future mental health crises in the country?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say something about the solidarity here. I mean, I think it's not a trivial thing that so many people, and I can say this about where I've been working within the SafeHeart NGO, but I know many others have done this as well in different organizations. People have left everything and, have not been sleeping. My family has barely seen me because we find this important to do. And right away, many people knew that things could be done and they have to do it. They didn't wait for the country or the state to get itself together, rather they acted immediately. So I think that's something which has been very important and very instrumental in bringing a lot of the immediate response, which is critical here. I also think that Israel knows a lot about trauma. It's a sad thing, but we have a lot of experience in trauma and in treating PTSD. And I think that people here know there's very little stigma about this. People tell me they have PTSD. I have people within my lab that have PTSD. So there's something that people know about and talk about. And I think that's very important because without that, it's very difficult to treat this and give the right treatment. And I'm also hoping that through this experience now, some of the stigma around psychedelics may change a little bit because, I'm again very non-judgmental here, but many people use psychedelics in different compounds for recreational purposes. And I think kind of the Nova Party exposed this. I know many parents that were, all of a sudden had to realize that their kids were at a rave and that they heard about all these drugs and everything. And I think many of them also understand a little bit that the reasons that their children chose to take these and that it's not all about kind of, terrible drug use in the war of drugs, but many people use this for things that make them feel better and make them feel happy and causes growth. So I think many things in Israel, these extreme events also propel us forward to grow as a country. And there's been a lot of that. And we're gaining a lot of experience for the wrong reasons, but it's still important experience. And we're trying to learn from this and get things better.
Yeah, I am curious. One question in the chat that I also just came up from what you said is, was there any correlation between those who were on drugs or had drunk the most alcohol and those who survived? Did the drugs and alcohol lead to more deaths, you think, than otherwise?
So
or kidnappings?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer because we don't get to ask the people who were murdered, right? So we have a survivor bias here. We only get to talk to the people who survived. I'll tell you something that I didn't show the slide for because this is recorded, but I'll tell you guys anyway. And most of the people who survived feel that the substances they took helped them survive. Okay, so if you survived, what now is important is what kind of narrative you build around this. What you feel helped you survive and how you feel. Are you guilty? Okay, and I can tell you that many of the people, or even most of the people I sit down with, they say, these things, these compounds, these psychedelics really helped me survive. And they have very interesting stories on how. And we're actually seeing a little bit of that in the data. And we're hoping to publish a paper about that soon.
Interesting. Another question that that you raise is the needs of the victims, whether survivors of the Nova festival attack or hostages who were returned safely to Israel, or children who had to horribly see their parents killed in front of them, or those who experience distress every time they hear the constant red alert sirens and have to stay in a bomb shelter. All these different traumatic events are similar, but obviously different. In what ways do you think that these different types of victims and their experiences of trauma will be affected in the long run if they don't receive the kind of treatment that they need, or if Israel is not able to afford the support or cuts the support that these victims need?
Yeah. So one of the most amazing things is that people can go through trauma and actually be okay. So the soul has its own means of mending itself. And even in really bad trauma, we only get about 20% of people who go on and have PTSD. This is a huge number because people who have PTSD, their lives are much, much worse. I mean, they have health problems and mental health problems and addiction problems, and that's difficult to get rid of. So I think the important part is really getting to these people and allowing this mental health interventions to be easily available to them. Because the most problematic people are not the ones who have the power or coming to my research. The most problematic people are the ones who were at home and they're not coming out, and maybe they don't have the same level of support that other people do. I'll share one story. Maybe I went down to Eilat, because in Eilat there's a large contingent of people who have survived the party who are from Eilat. But when I was there, I also met up with a couple of young people who were not from Eilat. But Eilat is kind of the end of the country, and it's all kind of on the fringe. And these are people who don't have the social support network that many other people have. These are kids that didn't live with their families even before. And one of them, he was sleeping in a tent in Eilat by himself, and a dog he picked up next to Gaza just before he left the party. And he lost friends and lost some family members at the party, and he was just there by himself. And this for me was very difficult because it was very even difficult to get to help this person because he didn't have a bank account and he didn't have a phone number. He had nowhere to charge his phone. And this was a young person which I've kind of taken on as a personal project, and I'm really hoping that we can get to him. But people really need, both at the social level and the psychological level, a lot of support now. And for me, it's kind of, we have to take care of all the people, every one in one, because this battle is going to be won not through trying to save each person here. And I can tell you that at 6 a.m, the psychiatrists and doctors within our group, which are very high-ranking doctors, they actually talk about cases. How do we help this one person? And for me, it's all about this one person and one person more. And through that, we have to get to everyone. Like no one left behind.
I know that you said obviously we can't speak to the victims who were murdered on October 7th. Are there autopsies being done though? I'm just curious to assess the level of alcohol or drugs in their blood, and is that possible?
I think it's theoretically possible. I don't think it's really necessary. I mean, we know that many of the survivors were also using a lot of drugs, so we know that it's kind of more a matter of, it's sad to say, but it's kind of a matter of luck.
Yeah.
Some people turned left and others turned
Yeah.
right, and some people survived and some
Right.
people didn't. And this is also something very hard to carry mentally, this kind of arbitrariness of how you survived. Your best friend just went, he sat on this side of the car and you sat on this side of the car and he died and you survived. And how do you live with that?
Right. I'd like to give some time to the questions from the audience. There's dozens of questions as usual. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'll try to combine them as best as I can. Have any of the Nova survivors had trouble readjusting to reality, trouble accepting the reality of what happened, or are any of them still confused or have been confused about what actually happened since they were under the effect of psychedelics and they couldn't tell what was real, what wasn't real? And in addition to that, do we know how many of those people under the influence were then taken hostage, or then went into the reserves or into the IDF and hadn't received the necessary treatment that they needed?
Yeah. So it's an excellent question. So we know that I think around 16 people were kidnapped from the party. Many people were actually drafted. So many people came back from the party And 1 or 2 days later, they went into Miluim. They were drafted into the army and going back. Many of them were talking to us and asking, what do I do with this? And we were working with the army. Actually, I must admit, the army was very good about this. The mental health officers in the army listened to us and were very helpful in trying to adjust as much as they could. Like how, if someone needed another week to adjust, they'd usually try to accommodate that. And then many of them went into Gaza, went into the army and went a few days later. Generally, most people, once the acute effects of the compounds went down, they came back. Many of them also experienced, the adrenaline of the situation actually, for many of them, kind of lessened the effect of the drugs they took. So many report that the main thing they were feeling was the adrenaline. Some of them, went through that, escaped, and then when they were hiding, they started feeling the effects of the drugs again. Yeah, but I think, I think many people were actually assisted by this. Like I know a lot of people tell me that they felt that especially MDMA was something that helped kind of be in a more calm state, and they experienced less trauma than people who didn't. And I think that's something very interesting that we're seeing now within the research.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Another question from an audience member is, do we know anything about the demographics of who was at the party? Was it mostly young Israeli Jews, or was there a diversity among the participants? And was there any difference in how they experienced it or their trauma after the fact, if they were Arab versus Jewish versus Christian, Muslim, whatever? And also in terms of age, in terms of other backgrounds.
Yeah. Age-wise, I know kind of what's going on. Most of them were young, but we also have some parents, some people who are older. I don't ask this directly because it doesn't matter to me, if they're Jewish or Christian or Muslim. I know that we have some people who are Muslims and Druze and Christians, but they're all people, so I don't even ask this, and we don't really know how that impacts the outcome. I think it's much more related to what kind of support you get when you go home. That's very important. So I think people that went home to a supportive environment and that kind of understood them or had groups of friends that they could meet with are doing much better off than people who kind of either live alone or went back to places where they couldn't really tell the truth about what they experienced. And I think that was, that is a major determinant of what kind of impact that you're going to have in mental health. You have good support and you can tell what happened, then you have a much better chance of recovery.
Yeah, one of our audience members was asking about that, about the family dynamics when people returned. How have the families been? We hear so much in the US, at least, about the resilience and the unity among Israelis right now. Pre-October 7th, there was some discord and some strife internally. Now it seems like most of the country is united. So how has that been so helpful for the survivors to see that resilience and community building from families and from communities?
Yeah. So we're now actually working a lot with the families as well at SafeHeart because there's a huge need. We get a lot. My spouse, she actually holds the hotline for the NGO. So we get parents calling all times of the night. They don't know exactly what to do and they need a lot of guidance. And we've now kind of opened another project where we work with the parents, try to give them some tools to work with and how to deal with this. Yeah, I also know for many of the people, when they came to us, the research, they were happy because we don't ask them, well, how are you doing? And we don't act worried. And they really like that. They want to feel normal again. And, they walk around at home or kind of through their town. Everyone, is looking at them and thinking about the trauma they went to. And many of them just kind of want to feel normal and accepted again. So we also opened kind of retreats where they can come together and be together. And that's been very, very important for them to meet up again and, and see each other. It also helped reduce a lot of the survivor guilt because, suddenly they met other people who also survived and, it felt okay to be alive. And this has been very, very important. So it's really important to give kind of the parents some tools to work with it because they're also going through a lot of stress, and how they deal with the trauma is important. And also to kind of, look these people in the eye and be able to know that they went through something terrible and you're there for them without judging and also without, trying to say if something, asking them how they are all the time. It drives them crazy.
I'm sure. I've been amazed, at least here in Miami, there's been groups of survivors that have come to speak to JCCs and synagogues, federations, and I've been amazed that they had the wherewithal to do that, to travel here and speak about their experiences and what they went through. But I think it's very important for them to be able to share their experiences and get the support from the global diaspora, and to know that we support them and we're here to listen to them. So
They're amazing
hopefully,
people, really. They're really amazing. I mean,
yeah,
if you have the chance to go and meet these survivors,
yeah.
they're funny and strong, and you know, it makes me, every time I go and actually have the chance to meet and interact, these are my better days.
Do you think that it's possible to have a festival like this again in that location, given its proximity to Gaza? I'm not sure how many festivals were there previously, but what do you think the future of the sort of rave culture in Israel will look like, given what happened?
Yeah, you know, trans parties, the parties like this, they're ceremonies, right? They're kind of reenacting an ancient ceremony of dancing around the fire and going all night and then waking up in the morning and then being there in the morning and being together. And a lot of people came in the first place to these parties to heal something. So I know we have a large part of the survivors that reported having PTSD before this party. So they actually came there as part of their healing process. So, you know, tomorrow, Friday morning, I'm going to be at this party in a tent in the mud, in the like a terrible mud, so here next to Haifa. But these people they're going to continue dancing, and because this is part of the healing process, and that's not going to stop. I really hope that it's someday, you know, we'll be able to dance next to Gaza, hopefully even with the people in Gaza who also want peace. And that would be a fantastic thing. I think, you know, at the end of the day, many people really just want to live in peace and have a good time. And it's been so tragic the way, you know, that the extremists take us into these directions of war. It's very sad for me.
Yeah, of course. Another obviously horrible effect of October 7th is the amount of denial and skepticism and criticism of Israel and Israelis, people similar to Holocaust denial, denying what happened. How is that exacerbated, you know, the trauma that they're already experiencing? I can't even imagine, especially the rape victims, and the lack of support from NGOs around the world. How are they dealing with that? Is it come up a lot among the survivors?
I haven't heard much of this with the survivors. Survivors themselves, I think they're dealing with much more personal hurts. I think kind of as a country, or for instance, for me, I found this super disappointing as an academic to see how kind of the important academic institutes across the world have dealt with this, and they've been not protected their Jewish and Israeli students properly. It's been very disappointing to see kind of, you know, how these things have turned into something very strange to me. I consider myself, you know, citizen of the world and a liberal, and I don't know. It's been very strange to see how many different NGOs, especially with those related to women's rights, have not supported these rape victims or have been skeptical. And you know, I'm all for anyone who wants to support peace, but I think, you know, anyone who supports the Hamas is just acting stupid. It's just ill-informed.
Say the least. Yeah. Hopefully that tide will turn, but you know, I think there's so much misinformation, social media, you know, obviously, and elsewhere that needs to be a re-education of our society. Another difficult topic that came up in the chat is the question of suicides. How much has suicide or attempted suicide been a part of the survivor's experience, and is SafeHeart equipped, or other NGOs and psychiatrists in Israel equipped to deal with that? I've heard some stories here and there, but I'm curious what you know, how that's played a role.
Yeah. This has always been a worry, of course. This level of trauma, it's always a worry. This is some, you know, sometimes I get a phone call 2 a.m. from a mother, and then, you know, we send psychiatrists to people's homes in the middle of the night. And this is something we worry about a lot. Touch wood, we haven't actually seen so much of this. We have some people who have been hospitalized And maybe that's a good thing, because if someone is dangerous to himself, maybe that's the right thing. I'm never happy about this, but sometimes it's the only thing you can do. Yeah, this is something which is always at the forefront of our minds, because that's what the most important thing to stop. But we've been very kind of attentive to that. And I hope this is something we won't encounter so much.
That's good to hear. And I'm curious also about the mental health, not only of the survivors of the attacks, but the first responders. I mean, there's so many stories out there of these heroes who came to save victims and took dozens or hundreds of them back in their cars and their trucks and housed them and fought off terrorists, all these heroes who were not even soldiers, most of them. Is their mental health being addressed as well? They're not technically survivors in the same way, but they really were impacted, obviously.
Yeah, I think anyone that's come into contact with this has been impacted. And I think these people also, people know this, and there are many, many NGOs that are trying to give aid to many people. I know, even secondary trauma is huge here. So we have clinicians whose responsibility is make sure that our clinicians are okay. Because if you have 10 survivors of these terrible stories, it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. So yeah, and I've met people of the press who've kind of covered this, what's going on in the kibbutzim, and have seen too much. Yeah, I think it's very important that people kind of make sure they're taking care of themselves, because it's very easy to the cause is so important and so kind of all-encompassing that people want to do everything. You have to make sure that you're okay, in case you have to make sure you can do that for another day.
Yeah, I'm happy that you said that Israelis are resilient. I mean, they've experienced terror before, and unfortunately are used to rockets and are used to going to their bomb shelters. And we've all experienced that ourselves when we've visited Israel. It's only still been about 3.5 months since October 7th. Obviously, the hostages are not all home. The reservists and the IDF soldiers are not all home. How long do you think this need for PTSD support and mental health support will last? We don't know when the war will end and when the hostages will come home, hopefully soon. But how much longer will we need the mental health support, and how great will that need be long term?
Years, clearly. I mean, the level of trauma here, I'm 49 years old and I've lived most of my life in Israel. I've seen so many wars. I've participated in wars. This somehow is the worst. Really is the worst. I was in Lebanon, but it's somehow kind of the involvement, the surprise attack, and the involvement of so many civilians, and this massacre of so many innocent people, and having it so close to home, and also this continued warfare for so long, they all exacerbate the trauma quite a bit. I mean, people are still not living in their homes, both around Gaza, but also in the north. I have friends in kibbutzim in the north. They haven't been home in months. So people are kind of, have to leave their lives, leave their jobs. And this is something, they're kind of refugees within Israel. And this makes everything much, much worse. So the need, both at the social level and the psychological level, is just starting now. Now we're just kind of in the acute phase. The dangerous situation is not even over yet. So this is going to be a huge need. And if we want Israel to be a healthy place, we're going to need to prioritize that budget-wise and interest-wise for the country for many years to come.
Right. And I assume, obviously, that those who are not young, who have experienced multiple wars and multiple traumas in Israel, this may have exacerbated past wounds and brought up old memories, as opposed to young people who may have less of that. But young people are also resilient in other ways, and old people have their own resilience. You have Holocaust survivors who were taken hostage, who made it back and who are, resilient. So everyone sort of has their own story and their own history. Another question that's come up a couple of times, a few people have said they don't have huge capacity to donate, even though they'd like to, but they really want to volunteer. Some could help on the ground in Haifa or be in Israel to help, or could help virtually. Can you give some advice to those who want to help that's not financial?
First of all, thank you to everyone who wants to help in any way. That's the first thing. We're really, really grateful. Even just not to feel that you guys are with us, you people are with us, that's a great feeling. I think the best thing is to write actually to SafeHeart. You can look at SafeHeart IL and see how you can help there. There are lots of different things, whether it's social media, therapy, fundraising, or just kind of spreading the word. There are many different ways you can help us. So that's great. And also, we're also happy to, if you can donate in a small way, that's also good. I mean, my students, I need to support them as they're doing this work. And all this will all help us do the research, which helps these people.
If people have follow-up questions that we couldn't address in this conversation, can we put your email in the chat as well? Can people write to you directly or to SafeHeart directly?
Yeah, best to write to SafeHeart, because depending on the question, we can kind of send it to the right people. Yeah.
Great. So let's put that information in the chat and on Facebook. Again, as always, we record this session. It's being recorded right now. I know a lot of you have asked if they can rewatch it or share it with others who couldn't be here today around the world. And we will do that. We send out newsletters pretty regularly. We'll send out our next newsletter either this coming Friday or Monday with a link to the recording. We also put the recordings on our website, on YouTube, across social media. It'll be available for you. For those of you who had questions that we didn't have time for, you can also email ASUH directly at info@asuh.org. I know someone asked if we're a 501c3. We are. So if you'd like to donate to SafeHeart and get a tax deduction, you can do that through the American Society of the University of Haifa, and we'll make sure it's directed to the right place if you just indicate where you want your donation to go. As Roy said, every donation counts, whether it's $1 or more. Everything really makes a difference. And we've seen that already in the almost $1 million that we've raised since October 7th for emergency funding. The pictures and the videos and the letters that we get from those on the ground serving the country and helping those survivors. Every single one of those stories is really moving and touching. So I'm really grateful to be doing this work, and I'm grateful to Roy for doing this work, and I'm grateful to all of you for being part of this effort. It all really makes a difference to Israel and to Israelis. So thank you again to Roy for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the incredible work that you're continuing to do in the aftermath of October 7th. I'm sure it's not easy, some of the things that you have to deal with and your colleagues, but it's so valuable and so important. Thank you again to our listeners and our viewers. Again, I want to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Rabbi Arthur Weiner and the JCC of Paramus and Congregation Beth Tikva in New Jersey. Again, email info@asuh.org or visit our website or social media to get more involved with us and to learn about what we're doing in the United States to support University of Haifa. Our biggest need is for emergency scholarships at this time, but all of our needs really could use your support, especially in the aftermath of October 7th and the ongoing war. As Roy said, this could take years to come back to some sense of normal in the country. So we will have our next webinar in a couple of weeks, and you will hear about that on our newsletter. Thank you again for joining us and for your participation and support, and Am Yisrael Chai.